I'm David Gower, and you're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Today on the show, we are joined by a man who played over 100 tests for England, scored over 11,000 international runs, captained England, and as a slightly younger generation, read us, will know him, has become one of cricket's leading broadcasters. Welcome to the Cricket Podcast. My favourite aerobatics enthusiast. How are you doing, David Gower?
Well, I'll just come back off the latest edition of aerobatics. In fact, I can honestly say that I was looking at footage of the recreation of the Tiger Moth thing from 1991 that we did about 8 years ago on the last Ashes tour that I was allowed to work on. And there is some brilliant footage of this Tiger Moth fitted up with cameras, properly by Sky, who did a really good job on it, doing the aerobatics. We didn't actually do the first time round. First time round was basically flying across the ground, down the line of the pitch, 150 feet. So a little bit lower than the equivalent of our Civil Aviation Authority allowed those guys in 1991. They got a bit of a fine as well. So that was quite straightforward. It was a couple of buzzes at the cricket ground, quick bank left, turn left, over the beaches of the Gold Coast, have a little look at them, come back, land, and think, well, that was great fun. Surely nothing can go wrong. Anyway, you can be wrong about all sorts of things, including the fact that no one might get upset. So yeah, it was a topic of conversation a couple of days ago. It still remains, it seems, a popular story. It still remains one of those things that I look back on actually quite fondly, despite the fallout. Despite the 18 months not playing Test cricket, that sort of stuff. I still look back on it quite fondly.
Well, it was a unique endeavour, wasn't it? I think besides, you and John Morris, I'm not sure anyone else had a forced 18-month hiatus from the game because of an aerobatics incident. So
yeah, I think John would say that his hiatus has lasted something like, 30 years now. But his hiatus is probably slightly more inflated than mine. But it was, you're right. I don't think anyone, there are no records, even since Roman times, of people doing the same sort of thing anywhere over an international sporting event.
There we are.
Do you regret not releasing the water bombs?
Well, we didn't have any. There was.
So that's not true then.
This is one of those things. It was probably one of those things that was mentioned at the time. I wonder what if, but actually we didn't have any water bombs. And if we had, Bruce, my pilot, because as you know, everyone in Australia is called Bruce. Bruce would have been averse to that on aviation grounds. So we wouldn't have done that anyway. But as I say, we didn't actually have any, so no problem. The only water bomb incident I can remember goes back to India, 84, 85, when I was captain in India. And we had a night in, Hyderabad, during a zonal game, where we sort of made our own fun, basically, with a bit of a sort of what they call them shikaras, which are basically Indian gondolas. Mm-hmm. We had a bit of a race around the ornamental fountain in the lake. We had people up on the roof of the hotel, which is 6-7 stories. And we had Graham Fowler and Pat Pocock on the roof with oranges and water bombs, who were bombing the paddler, so the gondoliers out on the artificial lake there. And the only problem there was that one of the water bombs kind of exploded too early, so it dropped on the terrace below, which was open air dining. And it took by surprise. I can tell you this, it took by surprise. There was a Swedish scientist who was staying in this hotel in Hyderabad, a very eminent person, very serious person, who had this thing landed right next door to his table. It does make a hell of a noise and it takes you by surprise. So we had this thing where when we got back from this gondolier race, basically, and it was carnage, absolute carnage. We got back from this, and I was tapped on the shoulder by the hotel manager, who said to Mr. Gower, yes, we have a slight problem. And he explained the situation, water bomb falling, very angry scientist who'd like to know who's in charge. I said, well, that's probably me then. So I went to see said Swedish scientist and apologised profusely. And he said, well, I'd like the authorities to be informed. So I said, I'll do that straight away. So I wrote a letter to myself on MCC-headed notepaper from the, borrowed a typewriter from the Daily Mirror, borrowed some notepaper from the manager, who must have been Tony Brown, I think, the late Tony Brown now. So I wrote a letter to myself saying this is disgraceful and action must be taken. Handed a copy to said Swedish scientist. And we ended up, I think, paying the damage to these shikaras was 50 quid. So it's lots of rupees. It was about 50 quid. I reckon, right? Sorted, done that. So by 11 o'clock that night, the whole thing was sorted. But that's the only time I've really had to do exactly that, I think.
There we are. Moving to your actual cricket. You make the game look so easy. I've spent a few days looking at a couple of the Robelinda compilations of some of your centuries and your double century. You made the game look so easy. On the flip side, we make the game look so hard. What's your secret?
Smoke and mirrors. Actually, those Robelinda, whatever, they are very good, aren't they?
Yeah, excellent.
I mean, I've over the last 2 or 3 months looking at Twitter and stuff, where they all seem to appear as if by magic. I've been able to watch myself, but all sorts of other people from that same sort of era, 70s, 80s, 90s. It's a brilliant collection, and I'm very glad that they managed to have it when it was shut down by Twitter.
Yeah,
Cricket Australia realised actually this is gold. This is great PR and all the rest of it. And they put the right sort of pressure on to open them up again. That sort of nostalgia, I think, is very, very healthy. And when, for instance, when I used to be at Sky, and all those things they did on the great players of that same era, 70s, 80s, and beyond, when you see those sort of half-hour profiles of people like Viv Richards and the rest of them, and you realise how really, really good they were, and how good they would be in any era. Even my sort of now sadly ex-colleagues, people like Nasser, others, Nasser would say, "Oh, just watch this on Viv," or it might be, "God, he was good." Mm-hmm. And actually, it's a really good thing to be able to see all that footage, and whether it's 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it might be, just to sort of be reminded how good these people were, because we're in an era where there are some fantastic players, which I fully acknowledge, and they do some extraordinary things. I mean, that last year alone, some of the things we saw in the Ashes, the World Cup final, all those things were just extraordinary. And so, yes, you can enjoy that in the moment, but I think it's just a really good thing to be able to look back a bit further and be reminded that we weren't too bad. If there was the same sort of footage available from, say, 20 years before that, that'd be even more interesting to sort of look at the people I was watching when I was growing up. So all the previous generations, or the Peter Mays, the Colin Cowdreys, all those people who were extraordinary players in their day, and rather different players to the ones we would see today. But no, anything like that at the moment has been gold dust, absolute gold dust.
Have you broken out the Ashes 2005 box set like probably most cricket fans have?
Actually, no. Actually, no. I mean, again, classic, great classic series. I suppose, I have, selfishly got fonder memories of the series we were involved in. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, where, next year is the 40th anniversary of the 81 Ashes, Beefy's Ashes. And we're already planning to put on, the odd event to mark that, get most of the guys back together again if possible.
Rematch.
Well, yeah. We don't want to, no point having a rematch, we just win. It's as simple as that. But that is something, because you can. I love these discussions. 2005 was really, really special. Let's face it, 81 was probably, quite probably, arguably, an even bigger turnaround compared to 2005. At least 2005, the fight back started in the second Test match. In 81, we'd already come second by a distance in 2. We were looking very, very poor indeed. And the fact that we should really have lost Headingley, we should have won. Manchester was fine, but we should have lost Edgbaston. And yet just in the hands of almost one man, not quite. Our dear late friend Bob Willis obviously had a major hand in what happened at Headingley. Again, without him, you still don't get a win. But Beefy made his reputation that year, and the whole thing that followed, so the extraordinary development of sort of this comic book character. Boy, sort of the infamy, the fame, the whole thing that Beefy then engendered for the next 10 years or so, which still serves him well now, of course. But that was the entire turning point. You can imagine, you imagine sort of the sliding doors thing, which sort of leads us to Gwyneth Paltrow and all the rest of it. But if you imagine sliding doors on that summer, if Beefy had gone to Headingley and had a bit of a slog and got out for 10 in that second innings, where would we be now? Who knows? None of us might be here.
Just on that, and this is away from our pre-agreed set of questions. So sorry, boys. What's it been like to spend the best part of 45 years playing cricket and following cricket with Ian Botham?
Good question. In the first part of that question, up until you get to the point with Ian Botham, the easy answer is brilliant. The whole thing of being, going from school, sort of breezing through a sort of almost aberration of 6 months at university, throwing one's lot in with cricket, enjoying 18 years playing, 20 odd years broadcasting, brilliant. A lot of that's been with Ian. And as everyone tends to say about Ian, quite rightly, he's a very loyal friend. So he's a really good man to have around you if you need a bit of moral support. He's a really bad man to have around you if you want to have a quiet drink out. So he's entirely suited to his latest career of basically peddling alcohol in vast quantities. He's a great man in many, many ways. I suppose it's like there are a couple of phrases I use for describing both the cricket and the lifestyle. One is talking about the cricket, against sort of in that era of West Indies fast bowling and stuff like that. There are half a dozen balls I've still not seen from people like Michael Holding, Sylvester Clarke, and Malcolm Marshall, and those sort of guys. And the other thing I say to people is that there are sort of 3 or 4 days I can't remember, which followed nights out with Sir Ian Botham. Who is, dare I say it, completely impervious to pain or any sort of side effects of alcohol and the rest of it. I've spent days feeling near death, or feeling that death would be the preferable option, and he appears to have absolutely no visible signs of pain or anything else. He's an extraordinary character.
What was that like when you were in kind of the Sky commentary box? You've had a skinful the night before. You're in a tiny little enclosed space. In comes Beefy, in comes Mike Atherton. You're sitting there going, "Who's the one who smells of booze?" There's all 3 of you. There was a tour of South Africa some years ago now where we got to the one-day internationals. There was one in Johannesburg, followed the following day by one in Pretoria at Centurion. And I remember it horribly. The sort of Saturday night in Johannesburg, and I sort of rang Beefy up and said, you doing anything? Should we sort of grab a glass of something and something to eat and early start tomorrow, so just a quiet night? He said, yeah, fine, perfect. Met him in the bar, and there were all sorts of people like Mike Proctor, and it's one of those nights where people just kept wandering in. He said, "Oh, I'll have a drink," and then the bar closed, and you hadn't eaten more than sort of half a packet of peanuts. And we sort of went upstairs and thought, well, we should have another drink just to finish off with. And somehow the night disappeared. So Beefy then drove us from Johannesburg, from Sandton in Johannesburg up to Centurion, 40 minutes without batting an eyelid, parked up. I felt dreadful. I sort of wandered in, thought, can't do it. In those days, this was Sky with a guy called John Gaylard who used to be at Channel 9 in Australia. And I was told, can you go and do a pitch report? So you stick your earpiece in, backpack, sort of battery pack on. Centurion has about 75 steps, each of which felt like about a metre high. And I eventually got down the field, staggered across the pitch. In my ear, someone says, right, go for it, mate. I said, okay, fine. So I said, welcome to, where are we? Centurion, okay, fine. Let's have a look at this pitch then. Sort of managed to get down onto my sort of haunches and said, yeah, looks pretty good to me. Back to you. and I got this voice in my ear from this fellow John Gaylard, who is an uncompromising Aussie, very good man, very good director. Said, well, I guess that's as good as it's gonna get.
I said, right, can I go now? So I then sort of staggered up these stairs again to get back up to the level where the stands were, the commentary boxes, and spent, the first commentary was an appalling effort. And eventually someone said, I think David needs to go home. So I was sent home to the hotel. But Beefy and Procky, who'd been there alongside us or alongside me all night, no one would have known there was anything wrong. So they just did the day's work, carried on talking the usual stuff. Came back that night, said, how are you? So I'm pretty bloody awful, thanks. And I slept for about 14 hours. I mean, that's the simple truth is that over the years, we sort of kind of worked out a system with Ian where he's always had people that want to have a drink with him. He's always had things going on. He's always been very good at finding events to go to or things to do. So you kind of share him out. And that works for him and that works for us.
Well, Beefy's garnered a bit of a reputation, and it sounds like it's somewhat justified.
Well,
but I mean, back to cricket, and you yourself kind of got a bit of a reputation for coming across as quite laid back on the cricket pitch. I think a lot of people have said that. Is that? Do you think that's fair? Is that a true sort of a true assessment, or is it just how you came across?
It's a half and half thing. I always, in all honesty, it was a bit of a construct, because if you're going to walk out to bat at Lord's, Sydney, Melbourne, Calcutta, Mumbai, wherever you might be, Bridgetown, and whether it's Michael Holding, Andy Roberts, Malcolm Marshall, or the Great Indian Spinners, or whatever it might be, wherever you walk out to bat, you're nervous. And my sort of attitude was, if you can sort of at least look relaxed, that helps, because in a sense, it also helps you to relax physically, mentally, if you want to sort of make that happen. Underneath, there's all sorts of stuff going on. Depending on some days you go out there and you are genuinely relaxed and things fall into place, and those are the great days potentially, but they can finish equally quickly. Other days where you just really don't feel like it, or it feels all wrong, then you have to have to work really hard. So I can honestly say that it was partly true. And I developed, going back to Ian has this thing where I once asked him a question on a stage at Lord's. I said, have you ever had a moment of self-doubt? And he said, just no. He said, point blank, no. And that's his way of resetting. So if there's been a bad day, or if he's had worries, just resets, completely forgets about it. I used to try and say to myself, well, okay, if you can, it's almost like sort of meditation, but not quite. If you can relax and appear relaxed, because it's like, showing fear to animals. They sense it very quickly. If you show fear to fast bowlers,
they are a bit like animals, aren't they?
Well, I'll leave you to make that point. But yes, you're right. It's if you walk out against any of those guys, and it's that sort of like that Blazing Saddles moment, with the gun hand quivering. If your bat is quivering in your hand, it's not a good look. So
you've already lost.
You kind of, you have. You're right, absolutely right. So part of it was true, and I sort of did develop a sort of an ability to say, well, okay, I might just got out for not very many runs. Was it my fault? Was it their fault? Was it somewhere in between? Sort of self-analysis. And again, on bad days, you are supremely self-critical. You have to be. So on bad days, I would sulk for the rest of the day. If it was one of those days where you think, well, actually, Richard Hadley or someone's just bowled me something which I couldn't, if you bowled it me another 100 times, I'd still nick it or still miss it, whatever it might be. I can accept that. Mm-hmm. And because you cannot afford to sort of linger on that for too long. But if you've let yourself down, then, for whatever reason, then you're allowed to be supremely self-critical and have a go at yourself and sulk a bit. But again, that doesn't serve any purpose if you let that go on too long. So all that sort of laid backness, it was, I remember going to, during my 100th test match, which wasn't a great success, at Headingley against the West Indies. And the line was, I went up to the TMS box in a rain break and was talking to Brian Johnston, the great Brian Johnston.
And he said, well, I don't think, sort of a bit of cross between Johnson and Blofeld. He said, what are the words you'd like to have, scrubbed from the record when it comes to people talking about, laid back, that sort of stuff. So, well, actually, the two words I'd like to get rid of right at the moment are court doujon, which is happening far too often at that stage. And I was
bold.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So instead of falling into the typecast dismissal, find other ways of getting out. Mm-hmm. But it's in the end, it serves well, to be honest. And if and then in fact, in the broadcasting career, which I hope hasn't completely finished, but in the broadcasting career where there are quite often lots of things going on that the viewer cannot see or hear, there's things, people in your ear with a bit of a panic on, wherever it might be. If you can use that same sort of psychology just to sort of calm the pulse rate and just allow people to relax around you and trust in. And I was always very happy to trust those around me, both in the studio who would say great things, and the other guys in the trucks who would be sort of controlling things to always get there before it has to be a full panic. So that sort of teamwork was great to have. And again, just the ability just to say, okay, well, what's the worst that can go wrong? There might be 10 seconds of silence. There might be, well, I'm sorry, I just don't know what's going on here. But actually, that doesn't really affect the world at large. There are far more important things to worry about. So just again, to have that sort of ability to try and steer a calm path through things was very handy has been very handy for the last sort of 25 years plus.
I think there's some kind of parallels to draw, especially with the upcoming West Indies England kind of test matches, because they can't go into that world, especially the biosphere that the ECB have obviously created and proudly announced today that all 700 people negative, which is great.
Yeah.
But how do you think that is going to go? When it came to the West Indies, you were playing against some of the best people in the world and making sure that you were switched on all the time. What was it like to kind of play against them?
Well, I always peddle this theory that I think that West Indies team, or those teams of the 80s, were probably the strongest teams ever to play Test cricket. And again, you always have to say, right, you compare Bradman's Invincibles 1948, that sort of thing, or the Invincibles 1948, the Aussies that followed in the 90s, Border, Taylor, War, all these guys. They led teams that were pretty much invincible too. But the West Indies, the line is this: West Indies were pretty much all powerful through the 80s. If ever we had them in trouble, they found a way out of it. They had brilliant batsmen, they had brilliant bowlers. If we happened to dismiss that lineup of extraordinary batsmen for something reasonably decent, a couple of hundred, well, they had bowlers who would bowl us out for a lot less very quickly. And the line was always, well, they never had a Shane Warne. They never had sort of McGrath. Well, they had never Shane Warne so they never needed one. It's as simple as that. They kind of never needed one. And that was that. So playing against them was tough, the toughest thing I've done. I would say that because that whole process of trying to get some sleep the night before, getting to a ground in the morning, and you sort of look at the team sheet and you think, oh, Michael Holding, yes, he's quick. Andy Roberts, yeah, he's quick. Joel Garner, he's quick and very tall. Might be Colin Croft, might be Malcolm Marshall.
And all the time you're not wearing a proper lid, are you? Even
no, but actually, to be fair, I tried, experimented with the early form of visor, which is that horrible Perspex thing, which was massive.
More like a COVID-19 PPE kind of thing.
Yeah, you can park a jumbo jet in those, and that was, it was ridiculous. And I just didn't like it. I felt sort of claustrophobic with that sort of thing. So I was prepared to take the risk with just the, sort of the vital parts protected, temple and sort of whatever little brain was in there. And I remember, I certainly tried. I have experimented being hit on the head without a helmet and hit on the head with a helmet. And as long as it's a glancing blow without, you get away with it. But one or two solid blows on the side of the helmet, which I was very glad I was wearing one at the time. And there was one, I think, in the 86 series in West Indies, the Caribbean. I was going well at tea time, I think in Antigua. It was in Antigua. And I almost toyed with the idea of putting a floppy hat on to go out for the final session of the day.
And in that first over, having put the helmet back on again, Colin Croft bowled me a bouncer, which clanged off the side, went down for 4-leg bides, which, obviously productive. And it's just, you just think, well, actually, they have been such a major thing, in a sense, very simple. But we were there in Australia in sort of the late 70s, 78, when they first developed the first proper cricket helmet, as opposed to the motorcycle helmets that Dennis Amiss, Tony Gregg, and these guys were wearing in World Series, which were very funny. And they did a job. But, I mean, they couldn't hear a thing. I mean, there's all these imagine all the padding in a motorcycle helmet.
It must be boiling hot as well.
Boiling hot. And if someone said, yes, what?
You got to put the visor up first. Sorry, what did you say?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was an extraordinary era. So, I mean, so we've been very lucky that we played in an era where, sort of the PPE for cricket became better designs, more effective, and of course nowadays it's just instinctive, or it's just de rigueur for everyone to wear a visor. Mm-hmm. And obviously, I suppose if you have to do it and you get used to it very young or very quickly, then you realise it kind of works. And if for instance, if Alistair Cook can get 12,000 runs wearing a visor, can't be all bad. It obviously doesn't quite get in the way as some people feared it might. But I used to find it very claustrophobic being behind something.
Yeah. Just to bring us up to date, then obviously England do kick off a series against the West Indies in, is it exactly 2 weeks or 2 weeks tomorrow? Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on how you think that might go? How good do you think the current England team are?
I think England, I mean, I was down in Cape Town watching from the stands at the start of the year, and you can see, obviously, there are the current superstars. The Ben Stokes of this world are absolutely sublime to watch. There's a lot of there was a lot of progress made on that tour. So, for instance, that top three, it'll be interesting to see who they actually pick in the top three. And I've got a feeling that Burns will have earned the right on his previous performances to keep his spot as one of the openers. Mm-hmm. Crawley could easily come in at 3. Sibley's earned, again, did well enough, competently well enough to keep his slot as an opener as well. So it might be Joe Denley who has to miss out, who, again, did a good job, but hasn't really put huge figures on into the scorecard. So you've got that. You've got Root, who is obviously a very, very fine player. You've got a very strong-looking middle order, pretty good bowling attack. I mean, looking at the West Indies, they've got some good bowling. I mean, they've got some pace. I mean, there are a couple of echoes of the past with some of the guys they've got here who are good bowlers as well as sharp. Mm-hmm. So they will not be taken lightly by anyone. But again, you just have to say that if you went through man for man, even in these ridiculously extraordinary circumstances, man for man, England should be the stronger side. But what it's like, I mean, I did see a comment about a month ago where this whole thing about playing without a crowd was mentioned, and the West Indies, the way they play their cricket, their Test matches are played in front of 20 people, their first-class cricket is played in front of 10 people, so they're kind of used to playing in empty stadiums. I mean, the only thing that works out there is the Caribbean Premier League, where they get a few people in. So it will be weird. And I have suggested pop-up crowds so that someone with a button can flick that button, and if someone gets 50, 20,000 cardboard cutouts suddenly stand up and applaud.
So it's like the worst game of Guess Who I could possibly imagine.
I think I've got about a week or so to set this company up to supply the Ageas Bowl and Old Trafford with pop-up crowds.
Well, I'm in for one.
Yeah, you've got 3 willing participants.
Yeah.
They're doing it with the football as well, aren't they? They've got the fake crowd on Sky. I just like to envision someone sitting behind a mixing desk, just sort of like measuring the crowds of each side. If it looks close, get a couple of crowd catchers in there as well. A little knob for the crowd catch. That'd be good.
Yeah. But I mean, overall, of course, the thing is that we're all a bit desperate that it happens, and it's good that it can happen, and it's good that they've made so many, all the right preparations as far as we can tell at this stage to make it happen successfully. And I mean, it is a bit of a saviour. I mean, let's face it. I suppose the critics of sport in general say, well, what's the point of sport? And yet we all know, anyone who's been involved in it or loved it or just, has it ingrained in their systems knows that there is so much value to be taken from sport. So if you're a cricket fan, you want to see cricket played. Even if you can't actually get to a ground to watch it physically, just the fact that it's being played gives you, that sort of vital commodity, which is hope that things will get back to something acceptable reasonably quickly. I mean, I know the one thing nobody knows is what's going to happen next. And I don't care how many science degrees you've got. I've just come from, hands up, just come from a glass or two with friends, some of whom are doctors. And they all have their opinions about whether you should be wearing masks, what the distancing should be, the whole thing. There's a million opinions out there. But no one actually really, 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 really knows the absolute answer. Otherwise, we'd have sorted that out months ago. So just to get something back again, just to get something going again is crucial, I think. And let's just keep our fingers crossed that we get through, all being well, 6 test matches without undue drama.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, hopefully there's some drama on the field, but otherwise, couldn't agree more. I think.
A little bit of action would be nice. Yeah.
It's 6 draws.
6 draws, batting out the final day.
Yeah.
So hopefully we didn't bring up too many painful memories by discussing the West Indies. Obviously, as captain, you endured a couple of chastening defeats at their hands. But
Max twisting the knife in to our special guest.
It's all right. I'm going to bring it back to you had some pretty good moments as well. Not least beating the Aussies 3-1 in the Ashes, where you had a pretty good series yourself as well. But we wanted to know how you felt about the England captaincy and sort of your approach, your preferred style of captaining in that team.
Yeah. I've thought about this then, now, in between. I wouldn't rank myself as the finest ever by any stretch of the imagination. I had, in terms of style, I had one pretty important abiding principle, which is I always wanted my teams to be involved. So I was always very keen to encourage them to think for themselves. So, for instance, team meetings, I wanted to be inclusive, not just a lecture from captain and management as to what's going to happen and what time we leave in the morning, end of story. I wanted people to contribute. If you're, for instance, where did I tour as captain? India for one. But if you're thinking about, right, how do we operate in India? The players against us, Sunil Gavaskar, that sort of stuff. I didn't want to have to say, right, this is how we get Sunil out. I wanted the bowlers involved to say, well, okay, I've got an idea. Let's do it. And I wanted that process to be live before the game, during the game, and after the game. So, and part of that was, I always remember very proudly, Graham Fowler, who came on that tour of India 84-85, said to me at the end of it, he said, thank you. Because for what he felt the first time in his career, the captain treated him like a proper player. So it wasn't, you must do this, you can have a net at 9:30 and then run around, do some catch. It was, what do you want to do? What do you need to do to be ready for the game tomorrow? That sort of thing. And therefore, it's one of those things I felt very strongly about, giving responsibility to players to be, first of all, themselves, to think for themselves, obviously to be part of a team. And in the end of it all, you end up with the captain, i.e. me, as the man in the end who has to say, well, okay, yes, it's a good idea, or no, it's a bad idea, or yes, we're going to do it, or no, we're not going to do it. And the only problem with that is when you're winning. So, for instance, 84-5 in India, we somehow managed to claw that series back and come back as winners of that series, which was fantastic. I was very, very proud of that on a tour where we had not just cricketing matters to deal with, but the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi, the assassination of Percy Norris in Mumbai, our own Deputy High Commissioner. So we had huge political issues to deal with as well, and just touring India. So to win that was very special. The Ashes you mentioned, again, very, very special to be able to stand on the Oval balcony at the end of 6 matches as an Ashes winning captain and as a contributor to the team. But all those things, when the system works, it's great. Like any system, when it works, it's fantastic. When you come back, you go from the Ashes 85 balcony, where I the classic line was when Peter West, as the host for BBC, said, "Well, what about the West Indies, coming up, this winter?" And I said, "I'm sure they'll be quaking in their boots," with tongue firmly planted in cheek and that sort of cheeky grin on my face. And obviously, history tells us it didn't go well. But 3 months in the Caribbean, using the same system, basically, if you lose as badly as we did, and that was one of the bigger disappointments, coming second so badly that time. But if it then doesn't work, the system becomes questionable. So, by the time I'd finished that tour of the West Indies in '86, there have been questions asked by the media, even by the selectors. Well, who's in charge? Because all this sort of allowing people to come up and suggest things, even though in your heart okay, it's my decision in the end. If it looks like other people are taking over, then it becomes questionable. If you're winning, no one asks the question. If you're losing, they ask the question. So, I don't know if you remember when we got back to England in 1986. We'd finished in the West Indies in April, so the English summer is starting, the season is starting. The first test match is against India at the end of May, probably, so not much of a gap. And Peter May gave me a real vote of confidence by saying you have one test match. So, and before that test match, so all this stuff sort of been echoing what had been written in the press and the rest of it, I had these T-shirts printed. I don't know if you heard the story, but I had these T-shirts printed where one of them had "I'm in charge" across the chest, and the other 11 for the rest of the squad said "I'm not." And so in those days, of course, you just arrived on Wednesday, the day before the Thursday start. That was it. Cup of tea, net, catching practice, job done. So I issued all these T-shirts to players that afternoon, and it worked. It worked pretty well. It was, the message was understood, and they quite enjoyed it. And I think even the press on the day got the joke, as it were. And so it was an attempt to make a sort of light-hearted response to a serious question. And the only thing I needed was to win that test match, which of course then didn't happen. So you are then judged by your results. And as we were coming off the balcony at the end of that game with India, the winners, Peter had already spoken to Mike Gatting about taking over the captaincy. I had the T-shirts, so when I came away from doing all the interviews and the rest of it, and was tapped on the shoulder and told that was it, no longer England captain, it's fine. So I handed the T-shirt across to Mike. And there is a photograph of me handing, Mike in his blazer, he's still in tracksuit, reflecting what had been going on for the last 30, 40 minutes, handing this T-shirt across saying, "I'm in charge." And the line I have to use, I'm afraid, is that I had every confidence in Mike that it wouldn't fit. Anyway, he then took over the role, as is the way with these things. So, and you go into the new era. The rest of that summer was a bit up and down. But of course, within months, we are in Australia, 86-7. And despite a very poor start, 4 months later, we come back with the Ashes, the Perth Challenge, the B&H one-day trophy and the rest of it. And Mike is, he's going well, going strong.
So you talk about kind of like getting in kind of relationships with cricket. Cricket is one of those things where playing in a team with your mates is one of the best things about it. Who were your favourite people when you were playing for England to actually play with, and what made them good teammates?
Well, Beefy is always a good teammate. You have to say that, otherwise he'll hit you. But when you've got someone like Ian Botham in your team, you have a bit like sort of Ben Stokes' character now. You've got someone that people naturally look to, who is larger than life on the field, larger than life off the field. So, good to be around. I guess we were very lucky to, in that sort of era, end of the 70s through the 80s, to have a little bit more freedom than maybe nowadays, on and off the field. So you had Ian. Alan Lamb was always a great mate, very, very fine player, who I'm amazed actually with Lammy that he got all those runs against the West Indies, hundreds against the West Indies, which is a real tribute to his skills. And his overall figures sort of don't quite reflect the talent that I know he had, and the ability. And he was great to be around as well, because we had we're different but similar. So he was always very active, or the ability to enjoy the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, so to enjoy the 24 hours, not just maybe the cricket, not just the fact you're away and touring, just to make the most of the whole thing. I think it's a very important thing when you're a touring cricketer to understand that. And when I first started touring, there were people like, say, John Lever, who had the ability to lift people because you just had the right sort of character, So that ability, wherever you are, you could be in the sort of miles from anywhere in India, and let's have a bit of fun here. Mm-hmm. You can be in the middle of a test match in Australia, and it's just the ability to tour well. And that doesn't just mean having raucous parties every night, which is ridiculous. But it happens, yes, but not every night. So you just sort of the ability to appreciate. Actually, this sounds a bit cliche, but appreciate how privileged you are to be in that position. So the responsibility is obviously to try and win games for England. The responsibility is to try and get the best out of yourself as part of a team trying to win games for England. But as a human being, I always thought the responsibility also was to be interested where you are. Mm-hmm. Some people would say that touring Australia is a doddle because it's a great place to be. And some people would say that, for instance, 30, 40 years ago, touring India was tough because it's not the country it is today, which is much more modernized than it was then when I first went there. But I always found that, from the first day I went there, found that to be an extraordinary experience with extraordinary people. And if you look at the sort of the different cultures from, the Antipodes to Asia, to the West Indies. We didn't have South Africa on the roster in those days. But I just found that fascinating. I found that very interesting and quite often very humbling. But just adapting to so many different people, so many different situations, so many different countries has been the most extraordinary education, the most extraordinary experience. So overall, that's the sort of thing that stands out in my mind as the the absolute privilege of somehow earning a bit of a living through playing and talking about it for 40 odd years, which, let's face it, you've got to be very lucky to do that.
Yeah. It's not a bad life, is it?
Just to dive in.
It's been brilliant and I'd like to go back to it. That's
just to dive in quickly. I think one of the really interesting things about cricket is the way that it is a bit of a melting pot, and lots of different countries do have their own culture or language, or even within the game of cricket way of doing things. Do you have a favourite place that you've toured, or if you were going to recommend a place for us three to go, for instance, where would you send us?
Well, what is it? Best part of an hour now. I guess it's still. I guess if you're only allowed to do one tour, then probably an Ashes tour. Because I've always loved Australia. There's a lot going on down there. It's ferocious cricket. The sense of competition on and off the field is very, very strong. But actually, once you've earned their respect, simple expedients or sort of making 100 or 2 here and there, it becomes even better. And we have a lot of genuine friends who we've met in Aussie over the last 40 years, who will remain so for the rest of our lives. In a sense, that's almost too obvious. I'd also recommend, and if we're lucky, within months we might be in India. I don't know, but I'd also recommend a tour of India because it is a very different sort of culture. I think a lot of people, even in this sort of modern India, where it's more westernized, more modernized, and for instance, you could do a sort of, as it were, very clean tour of India with some lovely hotels and all the rest of it. But that sort of culture around the cricket in India is extraordinary. Just the sheer numbers of people who get involved and the enthusiasm is, you have to kind of be there to see it. We, as I say, we experienced India from the early 80s onwards. And some of the places we went to, say in 81, 82, up-country places were very undeveloped. So you saw the raw side of India. And that taught you a lot about yourself and your ability to cope. Mm-hmm. But underline all that each and every time. In those early days in the 80s where Test cricket was everything in India. Nowadays, where they've gone through the era of Test cricket, gone to ODIs, gone to T20, gone to IPL, so the football is rather more spread. But in those days, an England team would arrive anywhere in the country. Not necessarily the major cities, but you get to somewhere like, sort of Guwahati up in the northeast. which is almost in China. It's the other side of Bangladesh now. It's miles from the centre of the core of India. But you get to an airport and there'll be a crowd. And they'd be sort of looking at you. I mean, I went, everywhere you went, outside the hotels, there'd be crowds of people just wanting to have just to see you. And again, that's quite an interesting thing to get used to when you don't have that same sort of stuff going on back in this country or elsewhere. Even, for instance, one of my other great passions is sort of the world of wildlife and conservation. And I've used all my tours of India to go and get out into the wild, try and find tiger, try and do a bit of that, do a bit of sort of Indian safaring. And there's a lovely park, tiger reserve called Ranthambore, which I went to as the guest of a fellow called Fateh Singh Rator.
Great name.
A great name. And he was a great character. He wore sort of one of those field hats, sort of a bit of zebra skin.
Well, they got a pied hat.
You define people by their hats, I tell you. But he was a brilliant naturalist, brilliant conservationist, ran Ranthambore all the time. This must have been 81, 82. We took the train. We actually took the train from Calcutta, as it was then, all the way across the middle of India. Or in fact, you're going to Rajasthan. And you get off at a place called Sawai Madhopur, which is a tiny halt. And I remember sitting there trying to get out of here, and there was a bit of a waiting room, and it was empty, and they very kindly sort of showed me in. There was a chair, I read my book. The train was 2 hours late. And just as I sat there, you'd think, no one would know. But actually, every minute, another face would arrive at the door. And within half an hour, there's sort of 50 people sort of coming into the waiting room, sort of because they're making room for other people. Just to look at, this is actually probably the next one, to look at the England captain sitting there reading his book.
Look at the hat he's wearing.
So, those sort of little things, I just find extraordinary. I think it's lovely the way they do that. And in fact, on that same topic, in Calcutta in those days, 81, 82, we met this lovely couple, Bob and Ann Wright, who used to run something called the Tollygunge Club, which is still there. I was there in Calcutta, keep saying Kolkata, last year, and went back to Tollygunge. It's one of these sort of outposts where in the midst of all the dust and heat and the rest of it, there is green grass, tennis courts, golf course, horses, gin and tonic, the whole thing. And the ethos remains. But Bob and Ann used to run that brilliantly. And we would sort of go from the hotel we used in Kolkata was the Oberoi Grand, which is lovely in its own way, very, very lovely hotel. But we'd go to Tollygunge for a drink and some food and different company. And they were brilliant. And they had, because Anne was head of World Wildlife Fund, as it was then in India, and they had their own camp in Kana, which is right in the middle of the country, sort of 3, 4 or 5 hour drive from Nagpur. And they invited us out one year to, spend 3 or 4 days in this tented camp in Kana, which is just an extraordinary experience again. And we saw, that's where I had the best ever sighting of a huge male tiger from the back of an elephant, 10, 15 yards away. And those are the things that, again, you talk about playing cricket, you talk about talking about cricket, those are the things like that really sort of stick in one's memory, because that's a privilege granted only because I was an England cricketer in India, meeting Bob and Ann, being invited out to Kana, stuck on the back of an elephant and taken to within 10 yards of the most magnificent male tiger. That doesn't come easily, but those are absolute treasures.
Yeah,
definitely a tiger and not a tiger moth.
Oh well, there's the link there.
So I'm sold on India. I don't know about you two. But
I was supposed to go this year, wasn't I? It's twisted the knife in me. I had a whole trip going from Mumbai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai. So I was going to go for the IPL. So maybe next time. It
sounds absolutely wonderful. But there are a couple of tours that you didn't go on. So on a bit of a serious note. So there were a couple of England Rebel tours that took place while you were playing, and you decided not to go on both of those occasions. Was that a difficult decision for you to make at the time?
There was temptation for sure. I mean, the 82 tour, which was, we were in India 81, 82, and there's a lot of discussions along the lines of, well, there is this tour to South Africa being mooted. Are you interested? Yeah, talk to me. Talk to me. But there was the assumption at the time, especially by all those that actually did sign up, that because in those days you had two contracts. You had your county contract, which ran from April through to September, finished then, and you had your England tour contract, which started basically first day of the tour, finished last day of the tour. So everyone assumed that you were out of contract, therefore kind of untouchable. I think I've got to say I was lucky that even though I listened to a few of these conversations, I was also speaking to people close to me who very sensibly advised, well, this is still, come on, just think about it. It's still a regime which does not go down well with the rest of the world. There are still very serious political issues at stake here. Therefore, and I was relatively young at the time, so why jeopardize or even think about jeopardizing what should be it's never straightforward, but potentially successful career playing for England. So I said no. Ian likewise had discussions and probably slightly different reasons said no. And the guys that went thinking they were probably going to get away with it. But now we know that there was enough evidence, as it were, there was enough to say, well, actually, no, you've done the wrong thing, 2-year ban, take some time off. So I was in the end, very glad that I got the decision right, albeit with help. I wouldn't claim any sort of halo of my own, saying no, I was so opposed to it on all sorts. You have to talk these things through and realise what's important. So I mean, the politics was important for sure, and my situation, selfishly, was also quite important. So the advice I got was good enough to stop me going. And by the time the second tour went, I was now in the same position as Keith Fletcher had been on the first one, which is, as England captain, you are the last person to hear about a proposal for a rebel tour. So through that summer of '89, which was in fact even worse than the series against the West Indies, should have been a far more even series. It never was. But through that summer, of all the people involved, so the people who were being approached to go to South Africa, like Gat, who had been injured and left out, and all others who were signing up to go to South Africa, even Mickey Stewart, Ted Dexter as England's manager and chairman of selectors, even they knew about it before they told me about it. And I mean, I only found out at the last possible moment at Old Trafford during the test match there, where we were just about to lose the Ashes with still 2 games to go. And it was a very, very low time for me. So I'm now sort of finding out that something like 6 or 7 of the players that were in that 11 had signed up and were not going to be available for the next game, which actually wasn't going to make a jot of difference to our chance of winning a game, but as already proven. But that was the most fearful situation, because you're just left out. I mean, but that has to be the way, because if you are planning revolution, or a rebel tour, then the one person you cannot tell is the England captain. So you kind of, you just accept that as a corollary of the position you're in. So there was certainly no choice to be made there. I went out to South Africa as a schoolboy, 74, 75, in the midst of apartheid. And at that age, 17 years old, you're not old enough to understand, I don't think. And we went out, I'd say, for instance, we were hugely well entertained. The tour went very well. We played some good cricket against both similar age group teams, 17, 18, against club teams. And the hospitality was outstanding. The old style South Africa could do that. And of course, the knock-on effect of that was when we went, for instance, to the Caribbean a year or two later as young England. My best mate, Chris Cowdery, captained the side that went to South Africa, captained the young England side in the Caribbean in '86. The fact that we'd been to South Africa and some of the other players had also been to SA 2 years previously meant that we weren't allowed to go to various places. So, for instance, we had to rearrange the itinerary in the West Indies. Luckily, Barbados was still good. Trinidad was still good, but we didn't go to Jamaica, I guess we didn't go to Guyana. No, we didn't. That was obviously well off the menu. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there were knock-on effects of that. And of course, once you learn a bit, then you understand properly what the issues are. So, for instance, if you sort of fast forward to Nasser Hussain, that World Cup in South Africa, and saying we're not going to Zimbabwe, which is a slightly different issue, but it's still in the same sort of bracket as a very big political statement. I mean, that was very brave of Nasser to start with. They had extraordinary team meetings about that, but they realised there was an extreme political situation, and they took a stand. So, which I think was to be applauded.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think actually, when it comes to some of those rebel tours, some England players and some England administrators probably didn't cover themselves in glory, and maybe were accepted back in slightly too soon, particularly when you hear the stories of what happened to some of the West Indian players that went around the same time.
Yeah, I suppose you can understand why. For a West Indies rebel team to go to South Africa, there are extra connotations.
Definitely, yeah.
And we could talk about that for hours, especially in the current political climate. And I do feel quite sorry for some of those guys who, because only on the grounds that we all expect everyone to understand every issue. And you can imagine some of those guys who went as a West Indies player on the rebel tours thinking, well, very similar to anyone else on a very basic level. I'm representing West Indies, of a sort. I'm earning money, which is going into the pockets, and it's food in the mouths of my children and the rest of it, that sort of thing. But there's some very sad tales from that. Of people who came back from that and were shunned and never forgiven. But it's a lesson in the strength of feeling, and it's a lesson in maybe having to learn about understanding issues and to maybe take decisions when they are as complicated as that, with advice from people who might see the different perspectives, the different dimensions. But on a very basic level, I would sort of defend the rights of cricketers to ply their trade. I mean, you can go back to Packer. Again, Packer was, and you think about the furore to do with Packer, and that didn't involve apartheid or any of these really serious issues and governments and the rest of it. It was just about breakaway cricket and breaking away from the old boys society that used to run cricket. And of course,
for the better, some might say, and Kerry Packers.
I'd agree entirely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, although those in power here at the time were ultra resistant, had the court cases and they were shown up in court and all the rest of it. Even they and some of those people involved then as the establishment here would have seen it and would have realised actually, there was something very powerful going on. And people like me especially, who played in the immediate era straight after that. And, I got my first chance to play for England because I guess, Dennis Amos, Tony Gregg, one or two others, Bob Woolmer, were banned. Mm-hmm. So a slot becomes available, you play. And we all benefited from the fact that suddenly there was a bit of money in the game. Suddenly people realised that you could market the game. Packer, if nothing, did all sorts of very, very fine things for the game. And the fact that you could actually market it and sell it, and there was actually money in cricket for some extraordinary reason hadn't been noticed for the previous 100 years. So we were the beneficiaries. So, I mean, my first Test match was the first £1,000 Test match with money that's promoted by a guy called David Evans, OCS, who sponsored the England team that summer as a response to Packer. Mm-hmm. And of course, over the years, people like Cornhill come in, did a great job. So the whole, the way the game is run and marketed now is infinitely different. And that all, you're right, that all stems from Kerry Packer having to market, some brilliant, actually I have to say, and brilliant cricket it was too. A lot of it, those first teams, so the top 11s for Australia, West Indies, rest of the world, had the best players in the world. And they played some extraordinary cricket. I mean, I watched a bit, I was in Australia in 77 in Perth and watched some of the cricket they played at Gloucester Park, which was the ground opposite the Wacker. It was a trotting track, so a very small bit of grass in the middle of this trotting track. But they put a pitch in the middle of it. And I remember watching, Barry Richards hooking Imran Khan out of the park. and thinking, God, that's extraordinary. It was brilliant. So yeah, we all owe a debt to them.
Well, welcome back. David, great so far. Our listeners will have different memories of you, as we've said, so as a player and as a commentator. Within your commentary career, you had quite a distinctive style. Was there anyone you were kind of influenced by, or was there anything that you kind of went into the commentary box and you were just like, actually, this is who David Gower is?
I think, in simple terms, in much in the same way as style of playing was just kind of me, then the style of talking about the game was very much the same. I was always aware from the first time I tried it. I mean, I used to do stuff for the BBC when I stood a player, the old Nat West Semi, that sort of thing, and sort of build up, bit of TMS, bit of TV, all that sort of stuff before I retired. I did a couple of winters down in Australia with Channel 9, which was very good training, partly because you have to fight your own corner as the token Englishman down there anyway. But I had sort of Tony Gregg as a bit of an ally, so as a sort of half and half. But the great people to learn from in that era, I mean, the best to learn from was Benno. So when I worked for Channel 9, Richie was the figure that we all know, but always available to give advice and talk you through it. People like Greg, great to be with, Will Laurie, the Chappell brothers. I get on pretty well with both Chappell brothers. I'm not allowed to say that to Ian, as in Botham, about Ian Chappell, because that is a feud that will never cease. Even if the two of them are buried in lead-lined coffins, that feud will continue for many generations still to come. But I mean, I quite enjoy Chappelli. Mm-hmm. So I sort of blended into that team for a while, and you can only be yourself as long as you get the words out in pretty much the right order. As long as you're paying attention, as long as you've got something maybe interesting to say or useful to say, then things carry on. So that's how that developed. And when I retired and had 6 years at the BBC first, again I had people like Richie Benno there, Tony Lewis. Tony, very urbane, very good at what he did, and you could learn from all these people. And the bits and pieces on TMS, you learn every time you're there. You're learning something. You're not everyone's cup of tea. That's one of the first things you learn. So this style might suit some people. It'll irritate the hell out of other people. It's you can only back yourself. So. The fact that it lasted this long was a pretty good sign, I think. Mm-hmm. And the fact there's what might be described as another hiatus here. I have to say I'm available for work. I'd very much like to do a bit more of what I've done for so many years and love doing. So it's just a question of finding where if there is actually a vacancy. But times have changed a bit. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. To some extent, although I think I for one would welcome you back onto the airways. I've got a question here. This actually came from my dad when I mentioned that you were coming on the show. So we're all born in '92, I think. So our David Gower reference has very much been the commentary broadcaster frame. He remembers you as a cricketer and wonders, bearing in mind how your Test career came to an end, whether the transition to the commentary box was, whether there was a sense of relief with that, and whether you actually enjoyed the first years as a commentator more than maybe the last years as a player.
Actually, it's a brilliant question. I have to say that it's a very, very sort of very clever question, because the last couple of years...
Well, hopefully he'll listen himself.
Yeah. It was inherited, or maybe not. The last couple of years of the playing career were up and down. I mean, at least the last season at Hampshire, I finished on a reasonably good note. But there had been a couple of seasons before that which were very unpleasant. Not very successful, lots of sort of dark moments. And what I did, the key thing I did in a nutshell, was take time at the end of that 93 season, just at home, sit quietly, wondering whether or not I'd had enough or whether I should give it another go. Everything was ready to go in terms of the broadcasting and journalism career, so I was sort of ready to go. And I just 6 weeks later said, no, fine, had enough. Went into Southampton to the Northlands Road Ground. Tony Baker, secretary of Hampshire, said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to retire." All very friendly and job done. So decision made, and on you get with it. So then you are away. I mean, the sort of nice thing in the sense is you haven't got the ups and downs, the extreme highs and extreme lows you get from playing, which you can never avoid. You know, the great thing about the highs is they are extraordinary and they live with you for the rest of your life. The great thing about the lows, or the bad thing about the lows, is they also live with you for the rest of your life, however much you try and get rid of them. But broadcasting is, you know, much more even keel. So there were new things to learn. For instance, you know, a few years later when I first went to Sky to present for them, you know, those first few months of that, first couple of years of that, you're learning that skill simply by being there. And, you know, there's some terrible moments, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. But I mean, that's the great thing. You're always learning. Whatever you're doing, you're always learning. So it was, in a sense, a bit of a relief to get into the next stage of a career. And also, you know, really nice to know that you can earn a bit of money from broadcasting, a bit of money from journalism. You know, so the world still seemed to go around at the right speed, and you know, it was still very much fun to be involved in that. And you're still, for instance, with a lot of the same people you've been working with, you know, the likes of sort of Botham. You know, Ian came into commentary boxes, others. You know, so you're in the same world, and that's a familiar world. Therefore, it's a safe world. Therefore, it's a good world. But new skills needed. So I was always aware that you've got to learn those new skills, and if you don't, people can still take a view. You know, exactly like selectors for cricket teams. You know, if they take a view that you're not up to scratch, they can get rid of you. So. The fact that it's, as I said, the fact that it survived for quite so long was great. I'm pretty proud. I'm pretty proud of the playing days. I'm pretty proud of the broadcasting days. I know there were moments where people got upset. There are moments where, you know, there are always, in any team environment, there are going to be disagreements. But as long as you come out of it the other side strong, then that's absolutely fine. So yeah, it has been great, which is one really good reason I'd like to find some ways of continuing it still.
Well, I was going to say, so last year the words you used were kind of being retired from your kind of Sky days, but there's been plenty of fans calling out for your return. Yep. We kind of mentioned some people who might or might not be kind of acrimoniously on the South Africa tour earlier, and one of them recently vacated a position on TMS. For maybe better or worse, who knows? But is there something? Is there that ambition for you to get back into the commentary box, and would kind of a flourishing return to TMS be of interest to you?
The easy answer is yes, it would be of interest. And I mean, and it's no secret. I don't think it's going to upset anyone. I mean, I when we're in Cape Town, for instance, at the start of the year, I had dinner with Aggers. Who is well, it's a good start. Ex-colleague at Leicestershire. I've known Aggers for far too long, and we get on very well. I'm very fond of him, and John was very supportive. He said, "Yeah, well, we because there is, I think, a very valid view, which is whatever you want to do with broadcasting and commentary, and the way people portray sport, all sports, not just cricket." And however diverse you want to be, there is surely diversity should include experience. So if you're going to talk, and there are some very good people involved still, but if you're going to talk about context, and if your memory only goes back 20 years, if that's your only context, having someone around whose memory goes back 40 years gives you added context. And when I was growing up and listening to the greats, absolute greats, Benno, Johnston, Arlott, Christopher Martin Jenkins, all brilliant broadcasters, all with experience, all with long memories. And you gradually sort of assimilate people into those teams, so you sort of feed in the next generation, but you keep the experience at the back of it. I think that's a very valid point. But at the moment, Geoffrey, as you were kind of alluding to, who's kept you. I mean, Geoffrey, he's 3,000 years old. He's I
think and the rest.
But and I've known Geoffrey for 40 odd years likewise, and on a good day I'm very fond of him. and he's but he's made a he made a worldwide reputation, and he kept it going, which is entirely to his credit. Now, I'm a lot younger than Jeffrey, yes, but in the current climate, the wrong side of a certain number. And
you are in the vulnerable group when it comes to COVID.
Not to start with. But almost. I'm not the ultra vulnerable group. So
let's not insult the guests, Ross. Come on.
No, yeah.
You are in the group of people that remembered Marcus Trescothick's debut. So
yeah, well, even that, for instance, but I don't know. So I'd like, I've tried to peddle this idea. I did one of those cricket socials the BBC were doing when with TalkSport doing the live commentary out of South Africa. I did a day in Broadcasting House doing the social, which was lovely. It was great fun, really good chats, and the day whizzed past, and that was like a trial. That was all like my my audition to try and get back on the BBC, but. I know it's been extraordinary circumstances. I know, for instance, obviously, planning for anything this summer has been almost impossible. But let's put it this way: I would love to be around if possible. Mm-hmm. And the if possible bit is the bit we're all still working on.
Yeah, I think we'd all like to see it too. To be fair,
it'll be fun. It'll be. It's kind of a way of life. So but it's also it's the two sides. One is the sort of professional side, which is I think I would have something good to say and something to add. And whether you like that style or not, if you do like the style, well, you get the style. You get the way the way I speak and the way I enjoy the game. And of course, it keeps selfishly would keep me in the place that I'd quite like to be, in the environment I would love to stay in. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's back to that pop-up crowd business, which
at least you've got something to fall back on, right? You mentioned it when you were talking about the broadcasting and sort of that having people around who can recall memories that sort of others can't, and being able to bounce off each other in that way. And you've been in a pretty enviable position in terms of having a long, successful career as a player, and then remaining closely involved with the broadcaster and seeing sort of the game develop from there. So, I had a couple of questions on that. The first one, I was wondering whether how you thought you might have got on in the world of the current world of cricket and T20s, whether we'd be seeing you opening the batting for Sunrisers and earning the millions in the auctions.
Obviously, one would like to say that'd be a doddle. Yes, it would have been. The one thing about IPL and the rest of it, when they first started, as you know, it was dragging a few old Aussies out of retirement almost to give it credibility. Warne played, they're all great players. Warne, Hayden, these sort of guys, Gilchrist, brilliant players. Nowadays, I think it's very much a young man's game. So if you're growing up in this environment, I've always wonder, how would I get on with the ramp or all these things that people are doing nowadays? And I suppose the obvious answer to that is you would actually have to acknowledge you've got to wear a helmet with a visor. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the only man who makes the $1 million is your dentist. But although because but it's the same argument as ever, I think, which is whichever era you're brought up in and thrust into, you learn the tricks of the trade at that time. So my one-day career for Leicestershire, for England, so the things I would do sometimes to create scoring opportunities, backing away over extra cover, were the tricks of the trade at the time, and on a good day I was pretty good at that. I look back, for instance, I look back at say the 150 odd at Brisbane against New Zealand as one of those great days. Everything sort of clicked into place, a little bit of luck here and there, but everything clicked into place, and you end up with a suitably impressive score in a one-day international. So I knew I could do that in those days. Ironically, I sort of found that the will to do it seemed to sort of fade away a little bit as time went on. So the figures went down. They're not quite as good as they might have been. But if you are brought up in this current era, like a Morgan or a Butler or a Stokes or all these guys, and you've got that sort of talent, and Ben is extraordinary. Just the work he's put in last couple of years especially, the sort of the reinvention of Ben Stokes is simply brilliant. He's the hardest working cricketer of all, possibly alongside Virat Kohli. He's mighty strong, he's mighty fit, he trains hard, practices hard, and then you see what he can do on the field. And for instance, that innings last year heading in the Test match was sort of what I thought was a really brilliant modern innings, because it blended together Test match cricket, taking 3 hours to get off the mark, with one-day cricket, smacking 80, 90 runs in 20 seconds at the end of it. And it was the most brilliant exhibition of sort of blending the two cultures together to win a Test match. And you win a Test match because of it. So I mean, they're always, these things always evolve. But I think if I was 20 years old now, I'd be going, well, yeah, I'd love to have a crack at that.
You touched on it really well there, actually, and sort of we were interested in seeing what you thought about where the game's heading. I mean, I know it's something that people talk about a lot, and you've probably had people ask you many times. But do you think that shorter format is going to be the future of cricket, or do you think they can sort of coexist, and those elements of T20 will sort of make Test cricket a more exciting game for people who might be wanting to get into the game?
Well, I think, I mean, there's for some years now, test players have realised that they've got to put on a bit of a show as well. At the end of that, also you've got to balance that out. If you go 100% to putting on a bit of a show, what they call positive cricket, and it goes wrong, and you think, well, actually, a little bit less positive, a little bit more cautious, a little bit more acknowledgement of 5 days, and you can still win a game. It's that balance which has always made Test cricket the challenge that it is, and I think there are still a lot of people value that. Again, going back to Virat Kohli, when India were here last, and he was doing some extraordinary things, almost single-handedly keeping them in that series for a while. The fact that he would come out and say that to him, Test cricket was the most important, I thought was the best PR you could have. Because any PR coming out of India with their political and economic clout in this game of cricket is valuable. So Virat liking Test cricket is a very big message. And likewise, sort of the greats, Joe Root, Steve Smith, Kane Williamson, all these guys, if they make it known that they are going to judge themselves by Test cricket, that is an inspiration for those that would like to follow in their footsteps. But I'm equally aware that there are players out there who know they will never be Test match players, who have great opportunities. And the one I always sort of think of straight away is Karan Pollard, who isn't a Test player. He knows that, we know that, everyone knows that, but he is a very viable commodity in IPL and in one-day cricket, because that's where his skills are. And I have nothing against that. But if someone says to me, for instance, the only thing I would have against that is someone says to me, oh, Karan Pollard's a great player, I'd say, no, hang on a second. Can you qualify that immediately and add in bracket in one-day cricket? Because I don't think you're a great player unless you can master all formats. So those names I mentioned just now, who are brilliant in whether it's 20 overs, 50 overs, or 5 days, then those are the great players of the modern era. So at least, I think it's good to have the variety, good to have the opportunity, good to have all those many ways of entertaining a public. We still don't know what the 100 is going to be like, and we'll have to wait at least another year for that, maybe. So there's always going to be change. We have to accept there is change in everything. Not just cricket, but around us there are changes happening ever more rapidly. So you can't just sit there quietly in your eco-secure bubble thinking it's going to be the same for the next 50 years.
You mentioned the 100. So what do you think about the 100? Because the ECB have done their best to make it sound like a bad idea, but then there is complete kind of positivity in trying to galvanise interest in the game. So what are your thoughts around it?
Well, I know some very good people who are very enthusiastic about it. Obviously, those at ECB are the most enthusiastic about it because it's their product. They need to sell it. They need to make it work. And they see, again, in this ever-changing world, they see value in it, which I can be as sceptical as the next man about, for instance, where this brand new audience is going to come from. That's going to suddenly flock to the 100 as opposed to anything else. Okay, maybe that's an exaggeration in terms of what they're actually trying to do there, but trying to broaden the audience is obviously, in principle, a very, very good thing. In practical terms, 100 balls versus 120 balls isn't a huge difference. And if it becomes a product which, if, as for instance, the hierarchy at ECB reckon is becomes something they can sell, then great. We have an asset that was starts as ours. Whereas, for instance, when it go back 10, 11, 12 years now, IPL at the outset was possibly a joint venture, which we got wrong.
I mean, I for one, I think English cricket would be much better if Alan Stanford actually stayed outside of prison. It could have been a better thing.
You might find yourself in a minority on that. And there are lots of people who have absolutely no interest in cricket, who have a lot of interest in Alan Stanford, who would maybe quite like him to be released, but for rather.
Just moving on to kind of wrap things up, I suppose. What you're up to now. I saw on Twitter the other day, David, that you are the new president of the Lords Taverners.
Yep.
What does that entail, and how did you end up in that position?
Well, at the moment, I've described this role as uneventful. There are no events. It's as simple as that. I was introduced to the Lords Taverners when I first started playing for England, really. And so you're going back 40 odd years here. And it has, it's an organisation with a lot of history, which those know that it started literally in the tavern stand at Lords with actors, cricket lovers, and that sort of synergy between the different worlds, between the world of cricket, TV, stage, theatre, film. In fact, anything now. I mean, it's been so long that you kind of forget what the origins were. But the charity has grown and grown and grown. There have been some very, very eminent people who have been president before me. I mean, I'm taking over from Sir Trevor MacDonald, who took over from Sir Michael Parkinson. Sir Tim Rice is a great friend and a former president. The Duke of Edinburgh has been a former president. There's a long list of very eminent people, so they've now sort of scraped the barrel and come down to me.
Well, maybe you're in line for an upgrade from the OBE.
Well, that is another thought. I'll be mentioning that.
Or you're just keeping the seat warm for Alistair Cook. I don't know.
Yes, exactly. Well, there you are. That's great. Or Strauss, or some of these Neo Knights. But no, so I mean, I've known the Taverners for a long, long time. I actually. One of these things, you end up, you sort of kind of do a bit for them, and then you sort of pass. And last 2 or 3 years, I've become much more active with them. And we were, apart from going to the Cape Town Test match, we were in Cape Town in March, and they have one of the great things they've developed in the last decade is this table cricket, which they have for their, for the disadvantaged and the disabled kids especially, who cannot walk onto a cricket field. We have a table tennis table with a rim, with basically a wall around it, little bats and balls. And if you ever see the way these guys play it, it is with the utmost enthusiasm and the utmost joy. So things like that, which they promote heavily and very successfully and are brilliant. They've added into the portfolio. So all sorts of things the Taverners are doing, which are still very, very good. And we went to Cape Town to promote table cricket on Table Mountain. Absolute genius. Because apart from anything else, we're delighted to go to Cape Town to do it. And I actually got the pads on. I mean, I wasn't planning to, but Paul Pritchard, who captains the 11, said to me one night, we just had a few drinks and nice part of Bishop's Court, and the game was due the following day against Western Province Cricket Club. And he said, "Lubo, mate," he said, "it'd be lovely. You just got the pads on. I've always dreamed of opening evenings with you." And I thought, no, not going to happen. Following day, there I am, walking out with Pritch, pads on, pretending, just turning the clock back. I can honestly say that it was not the best 5 I've ever made. And if it hadn't been what the game it was, the umpire should have given me out first ball. I missed the first ball, would have been LBW anywhere else in the world. But I hit 1-4. I was just honestly starting to get the hang of it and remember how it works when I nicked one back onto the stumps and had to walk off again and sulk for the next another half hour.
That sounds like an all too familiar story on a cricket
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid so. But just being involved with them has been great fun. And so, with Sir Trevor due to retire, his time in office was coming to an end. Someone said, "Well, would you like to take over?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'd love to." So it's a great charity. It's a good position to hold. I mean, obviously the work is done. The bulk of the work is done by those that first of all, support the charity and those in the office day by day, day after day who run the charity. But it's in good shape, it's in good health, good reserves of cash at the moment, so they can carry on doing their projects for now without having to worry too much yet. But obviously we need everything to open up. We need to get the big dinners going again, the games of cricket, all the things they do to raise their money. We need to get going with that. And when that starts to open up again, then it will indeed become eventful. Mm-hmm. So that I am looking forward to.
Yeah, hopefully it's not too long away.
Indeed.
I think that's everything we've got for you, David. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Is there anything that you would like to talk about or mention before we wrap up?
I don't know. I think we've covered an awful lot of ground in a very relaxed fashion, which I'm very glad about. I mean, I suppose if it were a sort of, I don't know, summary, the fact is I am very happy the way things have gone for so long. It was pretty obvious I was a bit miffed at the end of last summer that the Sky thing was coming to an end. Mm-hmm. And I was very sad, actually. I have to say, I was that final day at the Oval. They were very generous with presentation to Beefy and I, very generous with an extraordinary meal with some extraordinary wine at Beefy's favourite Spanish restaurant, Cambio de Tercio, in the middle of London. So we had a big night there. But I was very sad because, the obvious thing is, when you've got something like that in your life, you don't want to give it up. And yet you have to accept that, the selectors have spoken. So at the moment, it's all quite relaxed. When I run out of money next week, I'll be, I won't run out of wine yet. But, but the fact is we saw, so for instance, that was one reason why, for instance, the Lord's Taverns thing is a good thing to have, because there is, something to do, something valid to do. Mm-hmm. But I'd love to get back into commentary. I'd love to find things to do that are both interesting and productive. There are one or two other projects which we're branching out away from the cricket towards the wildlife again, which are also on hold because we can't go anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that, as everyone else is in their own way, that as things open up, there will be more opportunities opening up as well. But the cricket has been very much a vital focal point of my life for so long that I wouldn't want to walk away from it. So here I am.
Well, thank you ever so much for sharing. It's been absolutely amazing having you on the show, and thank you very much.
Well, pleasure. Nice to talk to you all, and I'll just say good luck with the next one, and good luck with the one after that, and good luck with the one after that. And let's hope that very soon there will be some live cricket or some actual cricket to talk about as well.
Fingers crossed. Thanks, David.
All right. Okay. All of you take care. You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.